Wasabi guys, coming back at you all with another deck tech. This time we are going to be looking at Kess Dissident Mage, a storm build that I have here for you guys, and it is very powerful. It's not really control built whatsoever. You don't have removal spells, counter spells, because the goal here is to win as early as possible. You don't really care what your opponents are doing. So let's get into this here. First, let's just go over Kess real quick. If you don't know what she does, basically on each of your turns, you get to cast one instant or sorcery from your graveyard. Right off the bat, she synergizes perfectly with Storm. What we want to do, we want to get as many cast triggers as possible, and a lot of times we're going to have an empty hand. So the good thing about her is that if we have a Wheel of Fortune in our graveyard or anything like that that can draw us a ton of cards, we can just recast it from our graveyard, refill our hands, and just go off either this turn or the next turn. What we want to do is just keep our turns going, and we want to build our storm count, and that's essentially what we do with this deck here. First here, I think it goes without saying, but you do need some good mana fixing, and we have that in the form of our mana rocks. We have that in Signets and Gilded Lotus. They all tap for colored mana. It's important to have mana rocks that can tap for colored mana, such as the Signets and a Gilded Lotus, because we also play Paradox Engine. A very fun card to play with, and it's going to help us combo off and go off really quickly, and we're most likely going to win the game if we have a Gilded Lotus out and a Paradox Engine. It's just very difficult to lose once you're at that point of the game there. We do tend to cast a bunch of cantrips, and going from cantrip to cantrip and just getting a ton of untapped triggers there, you're going to be floating a ton of mana. Aside from that, we do have some ramp spells here. We do have a Dark Ritual, a Cabal Ritual, and Dark Petition. Dark Petition obviously has the upside of tutoring a card, so you're essentially just paying demonic tutor mana to get a card which you need, but all of which help us get a ton of black mana, which may not seem like a big deal in a 3-color deck. However, we do have some filters. We have the Signets, and we have a card that we do play called Cascading Cataracts, where if we have a ton of mana floating that's not of the colors that we need, we can just simply tap it for the mana fixing. So we have that added benefit there. And in addition to that, we have cards that decrease the total cost that they need to be cast with. So we have Helm of Awakening, Nightscape Familiar, Baral Chief of Compliance, Goblin Electromancer, and Jace's Sanctum, all of which help to make either our spells in general or instants and sorceries just cost less. This is super efficient, and it's definitely important to have cards like these in your deck, guys, because it just helps the deck go further, and it helps you continue your turns, continuing to grow your storm count there. It's so important. Again, Baral, we don't have the upside of playing counterspell, so getting that extra card draw is not really a concern. We just want our instants and sorceries to cost cheaper. Jace's Sanctum does give us the added benefit of allowing us to scry each time we cast an instant or sorcery, so that is another benefit there. Moving on from that, we do have a ton of cantrips in this deck. These are usually ones that you expect to see. They're usual suspects. We have Brainstorm, Ponder, Preordain, Gitaxian Probe, Night's Whisper, and Cathartic Reunion. They are extremely efficient. These are exactly what you want. You want to draw into these. You want to open up with these. These definitely help you go off the sooner you get them, and they definitely help us to trigger a lot of our Spells Matter cards later on that I'm going to show you. Cathartic Reunion also has the added benefit of being able to dump cards into your graveyard so that you're able to then recast them using Kess. So that's a huge upside there. Speaking of cards that do that, we have some wheels. We have Wheel of Fortune, Windfall, Whispering Madness, and Time Spiral. This has the benefit of untapping your lands as well, so not only do you get to refill your hand, but you get a ton of mana to work with. And all of these wheels are just essential in any storm build, whether it's Kess or another deck that you choose to play with, because the more cards you draw, the more options you have, the more cards you get to see, and it just helps you win. It helps you go on. It helps you build up that storm count yet again. And a fun little combo here is to have a Notion Thief out there on the field and then decide to wheel, which is just hilarious because you get to steal everyone else's card draw off of those wheel effects. So that's an added benefit there if you do consider playing this guy. Also, not technically considered a wheel, but we do have an Ancient Excavation in here. Probably my favorite card from Commander 2016. It just puts in so much work no matter what deck I put it in. You're drawing cards and you're putting that many cards into your graveyard. You get to look at a bunch of cards, you get to dig deep into your deck, and then you get to just dump whatever cards you want to put into your graveyard. So it's great for graveyard fixing, it's great for card draw, and at its absolute worst, it's going to get you a basic land. Now we move on to our Spells Matter cards. These are cards that interact with our instants and sorceries being casted and they give us some sort of benefit there each time we're able to do it. So not necessarily just storm cards or storm keyworded cards, but they're just cards that interact with cast triggers basically. So we have Gutter Snipe, hilarious card. Each time you cast an instant or sorcery, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. A very underrated win con in a lot of these storm decks that I feel that kind of gets tossed to the side. Oh, it's just 2 damage, but you'd be surprised. I mean, it's not that hard to cast 20 cards in a turn using this deck, and even if you don't get to kill them off in one turn, you're most likely going to deal a ton of damage with this card. Then we have Flux Reservoir, probably the best storm card that doesn't actually have storm on it. Each time you cast a spell, you get to gain life equal to the number of spells you've casted that turn. Gets out of hand extremely quickly, paying the 50 life and then dealing 50 damage. That's crazy. So super efficient win con in this type of deck. In addition, we also have Talryn Sky Summoner, who gets us 2/2 Drakes. Even though it's not technically a win con, it could definitely help us stay in games where we may not have the best creature presence on the board, anything like that, and that's a lot of power flying. Then we have Metallurgic Summonings, very similar. It has the benefit though of being able to get you a ton of instants and sorceries back from your graveyard to your hand. Very interesting card. I think it's very underrated, and yet again in storm builds, not a lot of people consider this card. Then we have Mind's Desire, the only actual storm card in this deck, which is hilarious. Might as well just be a win con. If you can cast even like a smaller number, like say 7 spells in a turn, and then you play this, well then you get 7 storm triggers, so you get the original one and then the 7 more, and that's just a ton of cards you get to cast for free, and you're most likely going to win the game if you get that much advantage. Then we have Swarm Intelligence. One of the funniest cards for this deck here, basically copies instants and sorceries, so you can cast something like a Time Spiral, get 2 untapped triggers, so you get a ton of mana floating, and you get a ton of cards there to look at, and you can always do it at instant speed, do whatever you want there, and you have a ton of advantage. It's going to increase your storm count, it's going to make your deck go further. Could also consider something like a Possibility Storm for this deck if you want more cast triggers. But this card right here is hilarious, and it shouldn't be too hard to get it out. It is 7 mana, but we do play a lot of mana rocks. Check out my deck list if you want to see the full thing here. Since this is Storm and we want to cast a lot of cantrips, a lot of spells in general, we do need a way to get back if we are screwed late game. So we do have cards like Yawgmoth's Will and Past in Flames, good recovery, and it's most likely going to help us get back into the game or win it on the spot, because that's what these cards are capable of doing. They're very powerful. Other win cons in the deck here, we do have a Doomsday, which is hilarious. We do lose half our life, but most likely the cards that we get, they're going to win us the game there on the spot usually. So it's definitely worth that cost there. It is only 3 black mana, so usually one of the best cards in the deck if you can get to it. Ad Nauseam is not necessarily a win condition in this deck, but if we are on a roll, we can definitely get a ton of cards off of it. A lot of times it's going to give us better value than most of our cantrips are going to. It is risky, but usually the risk is well worth it. And then we have the Locust God. Again, not necessarily a win con, but considering how many times we draw cards and how many times we can wheel in this deck, it might as well be a win con. You just get a ton of hasty 1/1 flyers off of this dude, and he's awesome. He's going to stay on the board for a while. Even if he dies, he gets to return to your hand. You get to replay him. He has the activated ability to draw you cards, but that's not really all that important. The main thing here is that he's a flyer that gets you other flyers. Just awesome. So anyway, guys, that is Kess Storm. I definitely love this. The only negative thing I would say about this deck is the fact that it kind of just disengages you from the actual political game, which I usually don't prefer decks that do this, but this is just a perfect combo deck. That's all it really is. You're not trying to play political. You're not trying to get too involved. You just want to win as quickly as possible. This is an extremely competitive deck build, and that is a prime example as to why she is one of the most expensive cards from Commander 2017. I would say, though, it's kind of funny because the majority of the time when you're going off here, you usually don't even need her. That's how good the deck can be on its own without her. But in times of desperation, when you definitely need another card to cast, she's pretty good there. Getting something back from your graveyard is always good. That's going to do it for me, guys. You all have a wonderful day here. Void signing off.